union leadership came over, and this was made up of Jews and Arabs, and they realized there was no doctor on site, and they called for a doctor and also called a walkout. And the Jewish and Arab workers staged a walkout, a strike, a joint strike, and then this went on into the night. And the Arab and Jewish workers built bonfires to stay warm. Arab workers brought coats and food to the Jewish workers. They sat around the bonfires, they told stories about their lives, their families. And in the end, in the strike, they got some of their strike demands about medical help met. Other strikes took place in 1947, and 46 and 47. Pamphlets were produced that said, "Long live Arab-Jewish unity." That's one story from the period. Another story, and here is a dissertation waiting to happen for those of you who read Hebrew and Arabic. In a work by one of the pioneering Israeli historians, who's considered the father of what was called the new historians in Israel, Simcha Flapen. He wrote the following passage, claiming that in 1947 and early 48, on the eve of the 48 war, local people in Arab villages and Jewish kibbutzim realized, look, there's a conflict that's growing and we might get caught up in it. And we don't want that. We have good relations with each other. So a series among the various villages in kibbutzim, a series of non-aggression, very localized non-aggression pacts were signed. But of course, the events of the 48 war overwhelmed the local non-aggression pacts between the Arabs and the Jews. From these stories of the mid-40s emerges a question: what happened to these people who pledged their unity and their solidarity? Here's stories from the 1990s and the early 21st century. There are a number of groups, Palestinian, Israeli, and some joint Palestinian-Israeli groups that work together at the grassroots, often with non-violent direct action. The Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, the Jerusalem Center for Rapprochement, B'Tselem, Checkpoint Watch, Combatants for Peace. These are people, both Israeli and Palestinian, who are politically active in trying to find some way to live together. Why is it that these people, like the labor strikers of the 1940s, and the villagers and the members of the kibbutzim of the 40s, why are their voices marginalized? Marginalized to such an extent that people look at you in disbelief when you testify to their existence. Commonly, people will try to answer these questions by pointing to one side or the other and say, well, you know, it's their fault. But I would like to suggest something that's even more unpopular than taking that tack. What happened to these people is that they were overwhelmed by the modern political force of nationalism. Nationalism is a philosophy, a political ideology, and a political practice that necessarily constructs an out-group. By constructing an in-group, it necessarily constructs an out-group. It says, there is the nation, and outside of the nation are the people we don't have to live with. In fact, we are not going to live with them. Modern nationalism is often treated as a good thing. I once gave comments that were critical of the Israeli policies in the occupied territories years ago on this campus. A Palestinian student came up to me after the talk, the audience was dispersing, and the student said, "Professor, I'm glad to see that there's somebody on our side." I looked at him and I said, "What do you mean on our side?" He said, "Somebody who's for a Palestinian state." I said, "I never said that." He said, "But you criticized Israeli policies in the West Bank." I said, "Well, yes, I did." He says, "Well, then you're on our side." I said, "No, I didn't say that." I said, "By side, you mean the creation of a Palestinian nation state?" He said, "Well, yeah." I said, I didn't say I was for that. In fact, I'll tell you right now, I don't think it's a good idea." You could see the look on his face that was a look of disappointment. I said, "Let me explain myself. Let's suppose Israel, and it won't just be Israel, it'll have to be Lebanon and Syria and Egypt and Jordan, Saudi Arabia, say, yeah, let's have a Palestinian nation state." And then, of course, the greater powers of the outside, the EU, Russia, the United States, will have to agree to it. And somebody draws a map, draws a line on a map and says, "This is the Palestinian state." Okay? Great. Once you write up a constitution and pick a flag and wave the flag and have your national day of independence, what then happens? You got to get back to life. And life means work. What will you have in Palestine? Are you sitting on any oil? No. You're going to need investment. And you're going to need outside investment. Investment will pour in for labor-intensive industries. But investors always want something. They want a return on the investment. That's called a profit. And the job of the new Palestinian rulers will be to make sure that the investors whose money is building the Palestinian economy get the return on the profit. The Palestinian workers at some point are going to get upset by the fact that they have to take low wages to generate a high profit for the outside investors. Then those Palestinian workers, like the Arab and Jewish workers of the 40s, will go on strike. They will try to form a labor union. And what will the Palestinian National Police do? They will come out and beat the heads of the strikers, just as police in every country around the world do when workers go on strike. You want me to wish exploitation on the Palestinians? I certainly don't wish it on the Israelis, where wealth has been concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer families as the Israeli economy has been opened up to the neoliberal economic agenda of the last 20 years, where unemployment is climbing and more people are living in poverty. This is what national independence gets. Somewhere between 20 to 30% of the people living in poverty. But we should be happy because we're independent. Nationalism is not going to solve your problems. Nobody likes to talk about class. It's politically incorrect. But until you face the fact that modern societies have class structures and that some people live off the labor of others, you're not going to go anywhere. And I might add one more thing because the clock's running out and I have to go teach my 12:30 class. The other thing is the word imperialism. There's a lot of people who want to criticize Israel for its strikes on Gaza. What are the planes and helicopters that Israeli pilots fly? F-16s and Apache assault helicopters? Where do F-16s and Apache helicopters come from? Think about that. It could be that you do live in an empire. And the empire extends its influence around the world. And it buys off corrupt regimes. It buys off regimes and then furthers their corruption.